The Trials of Apollo, The Tyrant's Tomb, by Riordan. Chapter 1. There is no food here. Meg ate all the Swedish fish. Please get off my hearse. I believe in returning dead bodies. It seems like a simple courtesy, doesn't it? A warrior dies, you should do whatever you can to get their body back to their people, for funerary rites. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. I am over 4,000 years old, but I find it rude not to properly dispose of corpses. Achilles during the Trojan War, for instance, total pig. He chariot dragged the body of the Trojan champion Hector around the walls of the city for days. Finally, I convinced Zeus to pressure the big bully into returning Hector's body to his parents, so he could have a decent burial. I mean, come on, have a little respect for the people you slaughter. Then there was Oliver Cromwell's corpse. I wasn't a fan of the man, but please, first the English bury him with honours, then they decide they hate him, so they dig him up and execute his body. Then his head falls off the pike where it's been impaled for decades and gets passed around from collector to collector for almost 3 centuries like a disgusting souvenir snow globe. Finally, in 1960, I whispered in the ears of some influential people, "Enough already. I am the god Apollo and I order you to bury that thing. You're grossing me out." When it came to Jason Grace, my fallen friend and half-brother, I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. I would personally escort his coffin to Camp Jupiter and see him off with full honours. That turned out to be a good call, what with the ghouls attacking us and everything. Sunset turned San Francisco Bay into a cauldron of molten copper as our private plane landed at Oakland Airport. I say our private plane. The chartered trip was actually a parting gift from our friend Piper McLean and her movie star father. Everyone should have at least one friend with a movie star parent. Waiting for us beside the runway was another surprise the McLeans must have arranged, a gleaming black hearse. Meg McCaffrey and I stretched out our legs on the tarmac, while the ground crew somberly removed Jason's coffin from the Cessna's storage bay. The polished mahogany box seemed to glow in the evening light. Its brass fixtures glinted red. I hated how beautiful it was. Death shouldn't be beautiful. The crew loaded it into the hearse, then transferred our luggage to the back seat. We didn't have much. Meg's backpack and mine, my bow and quiver and ukulele, and a couple of sketchbooks and a poster board diorama we'd inherited from Jason. I signed some paperwork, accepted the flight crew's condolences, and then shook hands with a nice undertaker who handed me the keys to the hearse and walked away. I stared at the keys, then at Meg McCaffrey, who was chewing the head off a Swedish fish. The plane had been stocked with 6 tins of the squishy red candy. Not anymore. Meg had single-handedly brought the Swedish fish ecosystem to the brink of collapse. I'm supposed to drive? I wondered. Is this a rental hearse? I'm pretty sure my New York junior driver's license doesn't cover this. Meg shrugged. During our flight, she'd insisted on sprawling on the Cessna's sofa, so her dark pageboy haircut was flattened against the side of her head. One rhinestone-studded point of her cat-eye glasses poked through her hair like a disco shark fin. The rest of her outfit was equally disreputable. Floppy red high tops, threadbare yellow leggings, and the well-loved knee-length green frock she'd got from Percy Jackson's mother. By well-loved, I mean the frock had been through so many battles, been washed and mended so many times, it looked less like a piece of clothing and more like a deflated hot air balloon. Around Meg's waist was the pièce de résistance, her multi-pocketed gardening belt, because children of Demeter never leave home without one. I don't have a driver's license, she said, as if I needed a reminder that my life was presently being controlled by a 12-year-old. I call shotgun. Calling shotgun didn't seem appropriate for a hearse. Nevertheless, Meg skipped to the passenger side and climbed in. I got behind the wheel. Soon, we were out of the airport and cruising north on I-880 in our rented black grief-mobile. Ah, the Bay Area. I'd spent some happy times here. The vast, misshapen geographic bowl was jam-packed with interesting people and places. I loved the green and golden hills, the fog-swept coastline, the glowing lacework of bridges, and the crazy zigzag of neighbourhoods, shouldered up against one another like subway passengers at rush hour. Back in the 1950s, I played with Dizzy Gillespie at Bop City in the Fillmore. During the Summer of Love, I hosted an impromptu jam session in Golden Gate Park with the Grateful Dead. Lovely bunch of guys, but did they really need those 15-minute-long solos? In the 1980s, I hung out in Oakland with Stan Burrell, otherwise known as MC Hammer, as he pioneered pop rap. I can't claim credit for Stan's music, but I did advise him on his fashion choices. Those gold lame parachute pants. My idea. You're welcome, fashionistas. Most of the Bay Area brought back good memories, but as I drove I couldn't help glancing to the northwest, towards Marin County and the dark peak of Mount Tamalpais. We gods know the place as Mount Orpheus, seat of the Titans. Even though our ancient enemies had been cast down, their palace destroyed, I could still feel the evil pull of the place, like a magnet trying to extract the iron from my now mortal blood. I did my best to shake the feeling. We had other problems to deal with. Besides, we were going to Camp Jupiter, friendly territory on this side of the bay. I had Meg for backup. I was driving a hearse. What could possibly go wrong? The Nimitz Freeway snaked through the East Bay flatlands, past warehouses and docklands, strip malls and rows of dilapidated bungalows. To our right rose downtown Oakland, its small cluster of high-rises facing off against its cooler neighborhood, San Francisco, across the bay as if to proclaim, "We are Oakland, we exist too." Meg reclined in her seat, propped her red high-tops up on the dashboard and cracked open her window. "I like this place," she decided. "We just got here," I said. "What is it you like? The abandoned warehouses? That sign for Bo's Chicken and Waffles?" "Nature. Concrete counts as nature. There's trees too, plants flowering, moisture in the air. The eucalyptus smells good. It's not like—" She didn't need to finish her sentence. Our time in Southern California had been marked by scorching temperatures, extreme drought and raging wildfires, all thanks to the magical burning maze controlled by Caligula and his hate-crazed sorceress bestie Medea. The Bay Area wasn't experiencing any of those problems, not at the moment anyway. We'd killed Medea, we'd extinguished the burning maze, we'd freed the Eritrean Sibyl, and brought relief to the mortals and withering nature spirits of Southern California. But Caligula was still very much alive. He and his co-emperors in the triumvirate were still intent on controlling all means of prophecy, taking over the world and writing the future in their own sadistic image. Right now, Caligula's fleet of evil luxury yachts was making its way towards San Francisco to attack Camp Jupiter. I could only imagine what sort of hellish destruction the Emperor would rain down on Oakland and Bo's Chicken and Waffles. Even if we somehow managed to defeat the triumvirate, there was still the greatest oracle, Delphi, under the control of my old nemesis, Python. Now, how could I defeat him in my present form as a 16-year-old weakling? I had no idea. But hey, except for that, everything was fine. The eucalyptus smelled nice. Traffic slowed at the I-580 interchange. Apparently, California drivers didn't follow that custom of yielding to hearses out of respect. Perhaps they figured at least one of our passengers was already dead, so we weren't in a hurry. Meg toyed with her window control, raising and lowering the glass. "Reet, reet, reet." "You know how to get to Camp Jupiter?" she asked. "Of course. 'Cause you said that about Camp Half-Blood." "We got there eventually. Frozen and half dead. Look, the entrance to camp is right over there." I waved vaguely at the Oakland Hills. "There's a secret passage in the Caldecott Tunnel or something." "Or something." "Well, I haven't actually ever driven to Camp Jupiter," I admitted. "Usually I descend from the heavens in my glorious sun chariot. But I know the Caldecott Tunnel is the main entrance. There's probably a sign, perhaps a demigod's only lane." Meg peered at me over the top of her glasses. "You're the dumbest god ever." She raised her window with a final "stump," a sound that reminded me uncomfortably of a guillotine blade. We turned northeast onto Highway 24. The congestion eased as the hills loomed closer. The elevated lanes soared past neighbourhoods of winding streets and tall conifers, white stucco houses clinging to the sides of grassy ravines. A road sign promised Caldecott Tunnel entrance 2 miles. That should have comforted me. Soon we'd pass through the borders of Camp Jupiter into a heavily guarded, magically camouflaged valley where an entire Roman legion could shield me from my worries, at least for a while. Why, then, were the hairs on the back of my neck quivering like sea worms? Something was wrong. It dawned on me that the uneasiness I'd felt since we landed might not be the distant threat of Caligula or the old Titan base on Mount Tamalpais, but something more immediate, something malevolent, and getting closer. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Through the back window's gauzy curtains, I saw nothing but traffic. But then, in the polished surface of Jason's coffin lid, I caught the reflection of movement from a dark shape outside, as if a human-sized object had just flown past the hearse. "Oh, Meg," I tried to keep my voice even. "Do you see anything unusual behind us?" "Unusual like what?" Thump! The hearse lurched, as if we'd been hitched to a trailer full of scrap metal. Above my head, 2 foot-shaped impressions appeared in the upholstered ceiling. "Something just landed on the roof," Meg deduced. "Thank you, Sherlock McCaffrey. Can you get it off?" "Me? How?" That was an annoyingly fair question. Meg could turn the rings on her middle fingers into wicked gold swords, but if she summoned them in those close quarters, like the interior of the hearse, she A, wouldn't have room to wield them, and B, might end up impaling me and or herself. Creak, creak. The footprint impressions deepened as the thing adjusted its weight like a surfer on a board. It must have been immensely heavy to sink into the metal floor. A whimper bubbled in my throat. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I yearned for my bow and quiver in the back seat, but I couldn't have used them. DWSPW, driving while shooting projectile weapons, is a big no-no, kids. Maybe you can open the window, I said to Meg. Lean out and tell it to go away. No. God, she was stubborn. What if you tried to shake it off? Before I could explain that this was a terrible idea, while travelling at 50 miles an hour on a highway, I heard a sound like a pop-top aluminium can opening, the crisp pneumatic hiss of air through metal. A claw punctured the ceiling, a grimy white talon the size of a drill bit, then another, and another, and another until the upholstery was studded with 10 pointy white spikes, just the right number for 2 very large hands. Meg, I yelped, could you? I don't know how I might have finished that sentence. Protect me, kill that thing, check in the back to see if I have any spare undies. I was rudely interrupted by the creature ripping open our roof like we were a birthday present. Staring down at me through the ragged hole was a withered, ghoulish humanoid, its blue-black hide glistening like the skin of a housefly, its eyes filmy white orbs, its bared teeth dripping saliva. Around its torso fluttered a loincloth of greasy black feathers. The smell coming off it was more putrid than any dumpster, and believe me, I'd fallen into a few. Food, it howled. Kill it, I yelled at Meg. Swerve, she countered. One of the many annoying things about being incarcerated in my puny mortal body, I was Meg McCaffrey's servant. I was bound to obey her direct commands, so when she yelled, swerve, I yanked the steering wheel hard to the right. The hearse handled beautifully. It careened across 3 lanes of traffic, barreled straight through the guardrail, and plummeted into the canyon below. Chapter 2. Dude, this isn't cool. Dude, just tried to eat my dude. That's my dead dude. I like flying cars. I prefer it when the car is actually capable of flight, however. As the hearse achieved zero gravity, I had a few microseconds to appreciate the scenery below. A lovely little lake edged with eucalyptus trees and walking trails, and a small beach on the far shore where a cluster of evening picnickers relaxed on blankets. Oh good, some small part of my brain thought, maybe we'll at least land in the water. Then we dropped, not towards the lake but towards the trees. A sound like Luciano Pavarotti's High C in Don Giovanni issued from my throat. My hands glued themselves to the wheel. As we plunged into the eucalypti, the ghoul disappeared from our roof, almost as if the tree branches had purposefully swatted it away. Other branches seemed to bend around the hearse, slowing our fall, dropping us from one leafy, cough-drop-scented bough to another until we hit the ground, on all 4 wheels with a jarring thud. Too late to do any good, the airbags deployed, shoving my head against the backrest. Yellow amoebas danced in my eyes. The taste of blood stung my throat. I clawed for the door handle, squeezed my way out between the airbag and the seat, and tumbled onto a bed of cool, soft grass. Blur, I said. I heard Meg retching somewhere nearby. At least that meant she was still alive. About 10 feet to my left, water lapped at the shore of the lake. Directly above me, near the top of the largest eucalyptus tree, our ghoulish blue-black friend was snarling and writhing, trapped in a cage of branches. I struggled to sit up. My nose throbbed. My sinuses felt like they were packed with menthol rub. Meg? She staggered into view around the front of the hearse. Ring-shaped bruises were forming around her eyes, no doubt courtesy of the passenger side airbag. Her glasses were intact but askew. You suck at swerving. Oh my gods, I protested. You ordered me to. My brain faltered. Wait, how are we alive? Was that you who bent the tree branches? Duh. She flicked her hands and her twin golden Psyker blades flashed into existence. Meg used them like ski poles to steady herself. They won't hold that monster much longer. Get ready. What? I yelped. Wait, no, not ready. I pulled myself to my feet with the driver's side door. Across the lake, the picnickers had risen from their blankets. I suppose a hearse falling from the sky had got their attention. My vision was blurry, but something seemed odd about the group. Was one of them wearing armour? Did another have goat legs? Even if they were friendly, they were much too far away to help. I limped to the back door and yanked it open. Jason's coffin appeared safe and secure in the rear bay. I grabbed my bow and quiver. My ukulele had vanished somewhere under the back seat. I would have to do without it. Above, the creature howled, thrashing in its branch cage. Meg stumbled. Her forehead was beaded with sweat. Then the ghoul broke free and hurtled downward, landing only a few yards away. I hoped the creature's legs might break on impact, but no such luck. It took a few steps, its feet punching wet craters in the grass. before it straightened and snarled, its pointy white teeth like tiny mirror image picket fences. "Kill and eat!" it screamed. What a lovely singing voice. The ghoul could have fronted any number of Norwegian death metal groups. "Wait," my voice was shrill. I know you." I wagged my finger, as if that might crank-start my memory. Clutched in my other hand, my bow shook. The arrows rattled in my quiver. "Hold on, it'll come to me." The ghoul hesitated. I've always believed that most sentient creatures like to be recognised. Whether we are gods, people, or slavering ghouls in vulture feather loincloths, we enjoy others knowing who we are, speaking our names, appreciating that we exist. Of course, I was just trying to buy time. I hoped Meg would catch her breath, charge the creature and slice it into putrid ghoul pappardelle. At the moment, though, it didn't seem that she was capable of using her swords for anything but crutches. I suppose controlling gigantic trees could be tiring, but honestly, couldn't she have waited to run out of steam until after she killed Vulture Diaper? Wait, Vulture Diaper? I took another look at the ghoul, its strange mottled blue and black hide, its milky eyes, its oversized mouth and tiny nostril slits. It smelled of rancid meat. It wore the feathers of a carrion eater. "I do know you," I realised. "You're a Euronymous." I dare you to try saying you're a Euronymous when your tongue is leaden, your body is shaking from terror, and you've just been punched in the face by a hearse's airbag. The ghoul's lips curled. Silvery strands of saliva dripped from its chin. "Yes, food said my name." But you're a corpse eater," I protested. "You're supposed to be in the underworld, working for Hades." The ghoul tilted its head, as if trying to remember the words underworld and Hades. It didn't seem to like them as much as kill and eat. "Hades gave me old dead," it shouted. "The master gives me fresh." "The master? The master!" I really wished Vulture Diaper wouldn't scream. It didn't have any visible ears, so perhaps it had poor volume control. Or maybe it just wanted to spray that gross saliva over as large a radius as possible. "If you mean Caligula," I ventured, "I'm sure he's made you all sorts of promises, but I can tell you, Caligula is not—" "Ha, stupid fool! Caligula is not the master." "Not the master! Not the master!" "Meg," I shouted. Ugh, now I was doing it. "Yeah?" Meg wheezed. She looked fierce and warlike as she granny walked towards me with her sword crutches. "Gimme a minute." It was clear she would not be taking the lead in this particular fight. If I let Vulture Diaper anywhere near her, it would kill her, and I found that idea 95% unacceptable. "Well, Euronymous," I said, "whoever your master is, you're not killing and eating anyone today." I whipped an arrow from my quiver. I knocked it in my bow and took aim, as I had done literally millions of times before, but it wasn't quite as impressive with my hands shaking and my knees wobbling. Why do mortals tremble when they're scared anyway? It seems so counterproductive. If I had created humans, I would have given them steely determination and superhuman strength during moments of terror. The ghoul hissed, spraying more spit. "Soon the master's armies will rise again," it bellowed. "We will finish the job. I will shred food to the bone and food will join us." Food will join us. My stomach experienced a sudden loss of cabin pressure. I remembered why Hades loved these Euronymii so much. The slightest cut from their claws caused a wasting disease in mortals, and when those mortals died, they rose again as what the Greeks called vaikolaki, or in the TV parlance, zombies. That wasn't the worst of it. If a Euronymous managed to devour the flesh from a corpse, right down to the bones, that skeleton would reanimate as the fiercest, toughest kind of undead warrior. Many of them served as Hades' elite palace guards, which was a job I did not want to apply for. "Beg," I kept my arrow trained at the ghoul's chest. "Back away. Do not let this thing scratch you." "But, please," I begged, "for once, trust me." Vulture Diaper growled. "Food talks too much. Hungry." It charged me. I shot. The arrow found its mark, the middle of the ghoul's chest, but it bounced off like a rubber mallet against metal. The celestial bronze point must have hurt, at least. The ghoul yelped and stopped in its tracks, a steaming, puckered wound on its sternum. But the monster was still very much alive. Perhaps if I managed 20 or 30 shots at that exact same spot, I could do some real damage. With trembling hands, I knocked another arrow. That was just a warning," I bluffed. "The next one will kill." Vulture Diaper made a gurgling noise deep in its throat. I hoped it was a delayed death rattle. Then I realised it was only laughing. "Want me to eat different food first, save you for dessert?" It uncurled its claws, gesturing towards the hearse. I didn't understand. I refused to understand. Did it want to eat the airbags? The upholstery? Meg got it before I did. She screamed in rage. The creature was an eater of the dead. We were driving a hearse. "No," Meg shouted. "Leave him alone." She lumbered forward, raising her swords, but she was in no shape to face the ghoul. I shouldered her aside, putting myself between her and the Euronymous, and fired my arrows again and again. They sparked off the monster's blue-black hide, leaving steaming, annoyingly non-lethal wounds. Vulture Diaper staggered towards me, snarling in pain, its body twitching from the impact of each hit. It was 5 feet away, 2 feet away, as claws splayed to shred my face. Somewhere behind me, a female voice shouted, "Hey!" The sound distracted Vulture Diaper just long enough for me to fall courageously on my butt. I scrambled away from the ghoul's claws. Vulture Diaper blinked, confused by its new audience. About 10 feet away, a ragtag assortment of fauns and dryads, perhaps a dozen in total, were all attempting to hide behind one gangly, pink-haired young woman in Roman legionnaire armour. The girl fumbled with some sort of projectile weapon. Oh dear, a manuballista, a Roman heavy crossbow. Those things were awful, slow, powerful, notoriously unreliable. The bolt was set. She cranked the handle, her hands shaking as badly as mine. Meanwhile, to my left, Meg groaned in the grass, trying to get back to her feet. "You pushed me," she complained, by which I'm sure she meant, "Thank you, Apollo, for saving my life." The pink-haired girl raised her manuballista. With her long, wobbly legs, she reminded me of a baby giraffe. Get away from them," she ordered the ghoul. Vulture Diaper treated her to its trademark hissing and spitting. "More food. You will all join the king's dead." "Dude," one of the fawns nervously scratched his belly under his People's Republic of Berkeley t-shirt. "That's not cool." "Not cool," several of his friends echoed. "You cannot oppose me, Roman," the ghoul snarled. "I have already tasted the flesh of your comrades at the Blood Moon. You will join them." Thwunk. An imperial gold crossbow bolt materialized in the center of Vulture Diaper's chest. The ghoul's milky eyes widened in surprise. The Roman legionnaire looked just as stunned. "Dude, you hit it," said one of the fawns, as if this offended his sensibilities. The ghoul crumbled into dust and vulture feathers. The bolt clunked to the ground. Meg limped to my side. "See? That's how you're supposed to kill it." "Oh, shut up," I grumbled. We faced our unlikely saviour. The pink-haired girl frowned at the pile of dust, her chin quivering as if she might cry. She muttered, "I hate those things." You fought them before?" I asked. She looked at me like this was an insultingly stupid question. One of the fawns nudged her. "Lavinia, dude, ask her who these guys are." Right." Lavinia cleared her throat. "Who are you?" I struggled to my feet, trying to regain some composure. "I am Apollo. This is Meg. Thank you for saving us." Lavinia stared. "Apollo? As in?" "It's a long story. We're transporting the body of our friend Jason Grace to Camp Jupiter for burial. Can you help us?" Lavinia's mouth hung open. "Jason Grace is dead." Before I could answer, from somewhere across Highway 24 came a wail of rage and anguish. Hey," said one of the fawns, "don't those ghoul things usually hunt in pairs?" Lavinia gulped. "Yeah, let's get you guys to camp. Then we can talk about..." She gestured uneasily at the hearse. "Who is dead and why?" Chapter 3. I cannot chew gum and run with a coffin at the same time. Sue me. How many nature spirits does it take to carry a coffin? The answer is unknowable, since all the dryads and fawns except one scattered into the trees as soon as they realised work was involved. The last fawn would have deserted us too, but Lavinia grabbed his wrist. "Oh, no you don't, Don." Behind his round rainbow-tinted glasses, Don the fawn's eyes looked panicky. His goatee twitched, as facial tic that made me nostalgic for Grover the Satyr. In case you're wondering, fawns and satyrs are virtually the same. Fawns are simply the Roman version, and they're not quite as good at, anything really. "Hey, I'd love to help," Don said. "It's just I remembered this appointment." "Fawns don't make appointments," Lavinia said. I double parked my car." "You don't have a car." "I need to feed my dog." "Don," Lavinia snapped, "you owe me." Okay. Don tugged his wrist free and rubbed it, his expression aggrieved. "Look, just because I said Poison Oak might be at the picnic doesn't mean, I promised she would be." Lavinia's face turned terracotta red. "That's not what I meant. I've covered for you like 1,000 times. Now you need to help me with this." She gestured vaguely at me, the hearse, the world in general. I wondered if Lavinia was now new to Camp Jupiter. She seemed uncomfortable in her legionnaire armour. She kept shrugging her shoulders, bending her knees, tugging at the silver Star of David pendant that hung from her long, slender neck. Her soft brown eyes and tuft of pink hair only accentuated my first impression of her. A baby giraffe that had wobbled away from her mother for the first time and was now examining the savannah as if thinking, "Why am I here?" Meg stumbled up next to me. She grabbed my quiver for balance, garrotting me with its strap in the process. Who's Poison Oak? Meg, I chided. That's none of our business. But if I had to guess, I'd say Poison Oak is a dryad whom Lavinia here is interested in, just like you are interested in Joshua back at Palm Springs. Meg barked. I was not interested. Lavinia chorused. I am not interested. Both girls fell silent, scowling at each other. Besides, Meg said, isn't Poison Oak, like, poisonous? Lavinia splayed her fingers to the sky as if thinking, not that question again. Poison Oak is gorgeous, which is not to say I'd definitely go out with her. Don snorted. Whatever, dude. Lavinia glared crossbow bolts at the fawn. But I'd think about it, if there was a chemistry or whatever, which is why I was willing to sneak away from my patrol for this picnic, where Don assured me. Whoa, hey, Don laughed nervously. Aren't we supposed to be getting these guys to camp? How about that hearse? Does it still run? I take back what I said about fawns not being good at anything. Don was quite adept at changing the subject. Under closer inspection, I saw how badly damaged the hearse was. Aside from numerous eucalyptus-scented dents and scratches, the front end had crumpled going through the guardrail. It now resembled Flaco Jimenez's accordion after I took a baseball bat to it. Sorry, Flaco, but you played so well I got jealous, and the accordion had to die. We can carry the coffin, Lavinia suggested. The four of us. Another angry screech cut through the evening air. It sounded closer this time, somewhere just north of the highway. We'll never make it, I said, not climbing all the way back up to the Caldecott Tunnel. There's another way, Lavinia said. Secret entrance to camp, a lot closer. I like close, Meg said. Thing is, said Lavinia, I'm supposed to be on guard duty right now. My shift is about to end. I'm not sure how long my partner can cover for me. So when we get to the camp, let me do the talking about where and how we met. Don shuddered. If anyone finds out Lavinia skipped sentry duty again. Again? I asked. Shut up, Don, Lavinia said. On one hand, Lavinia's troubles seemed trivial compared to, say, dying and getting eaten by a ghoul. On the other hand, I knew that Roman legion punishments could be harsh. They often involve whips, chains, and rabid live animals, much like an Ozzy Osbourne concert circa 1980. You must really like this Poison Oak, I decided. Lavinia grunted. She scooped up her manuballista bolt and shook it at me threateningly. I help you, you help me. That's the deal. Meg spoke for me. Deal. How fast can we run with a coffin? Not very fast, as it turned out. After grabbing the rest of our things from the hearse, Meg and I took the back end of Jason's coffin. Lavinia and Don took the front. We did a clumsy pallbearer jog along the shoreline, me glancing nervously at the treetops, hoping no more ghouls would rain from the sky. Lavinia promised us that the secret entrance was just across the lake. The problem was, it was across the lake, which meant that, not being able to pallbear on water, we had to lug Jason's casket roughly a quarter of a mile around the shore. Oh, come on, Lavinia said when I complained. We ran over here from the beach to help you guys. The least you can do is run back with us. Yes, I said, but this coffin is heavy. I'm with him, Don agreed. Lavinia snorted. You guys should try marching 20 miles in full Legionnaire gear. No thanks, I muttered. Meg said nothing. Despite her drained complexion and laboured breathing, she shouldered her side of the coffin without complaint, probably just to make me feel bad. Finally, we reached the picnic beach. A sign at the trailhead read, Lake Temescal. Swim at your own risk. Typical of mortals, they warn you about drowning, but not about flesh-devouring ghouls. Lavinia marched us to a small stone building that offered restrooms and a changing area. On the exterior back wall, half hidden behind blackberry bushes, stood a nondescript metal door, which Lavinia kicked open. Inside, a concrete shaft sloped down into the darkness. I suppose the mortals don't know about this, I guessed. Don giggled. Nah, dude, they think it's a generator room or something. Even most of the Legionnaires don't know about it. Only the cool ones like Lavinia. You're not getting out of helping, Don, said Lavinia. Let's set down the coffin for a second. I said a silent prayer of thanks. My shoulders ached. My back was slick with sweat. I was reminded of the time Hera made me lug a solid gold throne around her Olympian living room until she found exactly the right spot for it. Ugh, that goddess. Lavinia pulled a pack of bubblegum from the pocket of her jeans. She stuffed 3 pieces in her mouth and then offered some to me and Meg. No thanks, I said. Sure, said Meg. Sure, said Don. Lavinia jerked the bubblegum pack out of his reach. Don, you know bubblegum doesn't agree with you. Last time you were hugging the toilet for days. Don pouted. But it tastes good. Lavinia peered into the tunnel, her jaw working furiously at the gum. It's too narrow to carry the coffin with 4 people. I'll lead the way. Don, you and Apollo. She frowned as if she still didn't quite believe that was my name. Each take one end. Just the 2 of us, I protested. What he said, Don agreed. Just carry it like a sofa, said Lavinia, as if that was supposed to mean something to me. And you, what's your name, Peg? Meg, said Meg. Is there anything you don't need to bring? Asked Lavinia. Like that poster board thing under your arm, is that a school project? Meg must have been incredibly tired because she didn't scowl or hit Lavinia or cause geraniums to grow out of her ears. She just turned sideways, shielding Jason's diorama with her body. No, this is important. Okay. Lavinia scratched her eyebrow, which, like her hair, was frosted pink. Just stay at the back, I guess. Guard our retreat. This door can't be locked, which means... As if on cue, from the far side of the lake came the loudest howl yet, filled with rage, as if the ghoul had discovered the dust and vulture diaper of its fallen comrade. Let's go, Lavinia said. I began to revise my impression of our pink-haired friend. For a skittish baby giraffe, she could be very bossy. We descended single file into the passage, me carrying the back of the coffin, Don the front. Lavinia's gums scented the stale air, so the tunnel smelled like mouldy candy floss. Every time Lavinia or Meg popped a bubble, I flinched. My fingers quickly began to ache from the weight of the casket. How much further? I asked. We're barely inside the tunnel, Lavinia said. So, not far then? Maybe a quarter of a mile? I tried for a grunt of manly endurance. It came out as more of a snivel. Guys, Meg said behind me, we need to move faster. You see something? Don asked. Not yet, Meg said. Just a feeling. Feelings, I hated those. Our weapons provided the only light. The gold fittings of the manuballista, slung across Lavinia's back, cast a ghostly halo around her pink hair. The glow of Meg's swords threw our elongated shadows across either wall, so we seemed to be walking in the midst of a spectral crowd. Whenever Don looked over his shoulder, his rainbow-tinted glasses seemed to float on the dark like patches of oil on water. My hands and forearms burned from strain, but Don didn't seem to have any trouble. I was determined not to weep for mercy before the fawn did. The path widened and levelled out. I chose to take that as a good sign, though neither Meg nor Lavinia offered to help carry the casket. Finally, my hands couldn't take any more. Stop! Don and I managed to set down Jason's coffin a moment before I would have dropped it. Deep red gouges marred my fingers. Blisters were beginning to form on my palms. I felt like I'd just played a 9-hour set of dueling jazz guitar with Pat Metheny, using a 600-pound iron Fender Stratocaster. Ow, I muttered, because I was once the god of poetry and have great descriptive powers. We can't rest long, Lavinia warned. My sentry shift must have ended by now. My partner's probably wondering where I am. I almost wanted to laugh. I'd forgotten we were supposed to be worried about Lavinia playing hooky along with all other problems. Will your partner report you? Lavinia stared into the dark. Not unless she has to. She's my centurion, but she's cool. Your centurion gave you permission to sneak off? I asked. Not exactly. Lavinia tugged at her Star of David pendant. She just kind of turned a blind eye. You know, she gets it. Don chuckled. You mean having a crush on someone? No, Lavinia said, like just standing on guard duty for 5 hours straight. I can't do it, especially after all that's happened recently. I considered the way Lavinia fiddled with her necklace, viciously chewed her bubblegum, wobbled constantly about on her gangly legs. Most demigods have some form of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. They are hardwired to be on constant movement, jumping from battle to battle. But Lavinia definitely put the H in ADHD. When you say all that's happened recently, I prompted, but before I could finish the question, Don's posture stiffened. His nose and goatee quivered. I'd spent enough time in the labyrinth with Grover Underwood to know what that meant. What do you smell? I demanded. Not sure, he sniffed. It's close and funky. Oh, I blushed. I did shower this morning, but when I exert myself, this mortal body sweats. It's not that. Listen. Meg faced the direction we'd come from. She raised her swords and waited. Lavinia unslung her manuballista and peered into the shadows ahead of us. Finally, over the pounding of my own heartbeat, I heard the clink of metal and the echo of footsteps on stone. Someone was running towards us. They're coming, Meg said. No, wait, said Lavinia. It's her. I got the feeling Meg and Lavinia were talking about two different things, and I wasn't sure I liked either one. Her who? I demanded. Them where? Don squeaked. Lavinia raised her hand and shouted, I'm here. Shh, Meg said, still facing the way we'd come. Lavinia, what are you doing? Then, from the direction of Camp Jupiter, a young woman jogged into our circle of light. She was about Lavinia's age, maybe 14 or 15, with dark skin and amber eyes. Curly brown hair fell around her shoulders. Her Legionnaire greaves and breastplate glinted over jeans and a purple t-shirt. Affixed to her breastplate was the insignia of a centurion, and strapped to her side was a spatha, a cavalry sword. Ah, yes, I recognised her from the crew of the Argo too. Hazel Levesque, I said. Thank the gods! Hazel stopped in her tracks, no doubt wondering who I was, how I knew her, and why I was grinning like a fool. She glanced at Don, then Meg, then the coffin. Lavinia, what's going on? Guys, Meg interrupted, we have company. She did not mean Hazel. Behind us, at the edge of the light, from Meg's swords, a dark form prowled, its blue-black skin glistening, its teeth dripping saliva. Then another, identical ghoul emerged from the gloom behind it. Just our luck. The Uranomai were having a kill one, get two free special. Chapter 4. Ukulele song. No need to remove my guts. A simple no works. Oh, Don said in a small voice. That's what smells. I thought you said they travel in pairs, I complained. Or threes, the form whimpered. Sometimes in threes. The Uranomai snarled, crouching just out of reach of Meg's blades. Behind me, Lavinia hand-cranked her manual ballista. Click, click, click. But the weapon was so slow to prime that she wouldn't be ready to fire until sometime next Thursday. Hazel's spatha rasped as she slid the blade from its scabbard. That, too, wasn't a great weapon for fighting at close quarters. Meg seemed unsure whether she should charge, stand her ground, or drop from exhaustion. Bless her stubborn little heart, she still had Jason's diorama wedged under her arm, which would not help her in battle. I fumbled for a weapon and came up with my ukulele. Why not? It was only slightly more ridiculous than a spatha or a manual ballista. My nose might have been busted from the hearse's airbag, but my sense of smell was sadly unaffected. The combination of ghoul stench with the scent of bubblegum made my nostrils burn and my eyes water. Food, said the first ghoul. Food, agreed the second. They sounded delighted, as if we were favourite meals they hadn't even been served in ages. Hazel spoke, calm and steady. Guys, we fought these things in the battle. Don't let them scratch you. The way she said the battle made it sound like there could only be one horrible event to which she might be referring. I flashed back to what Leo Valdez had told us in Los Angeles. The Camp Jupiter had suffered major damage, lost good people in their last fight. I was beginning to appreciate how bad it must have been. No scratches, I agreed. Meg, hold them at bay. I'm going to try a song. My idea was simple. Strum a sleepy tune, lull the creatures into a stupor, then kill them in a leisurely, civilized fashion. I underestimated the Uranomai's hatred of ukuleles. As soon as I announced my intentions, they howled and charged. I shuffled backwards, sitting down hard on Jason's coffin. Don shrieked and cowered. Lavinia kept cranking her manual ballista. Hazel yelled, "Make a hole!" which in the moment made no sense to me. Meg burst into action, slicing an arm off one ghoul, swiping at the legs of the other, but her movements were sluggish, and with the diorama under one arm, she could only use a single sword effectively. If the ghouls had been interested in killing her, she would have been overwhelmed. Instead, they shoved past her, intent on stopping me before I could strum a chord. Everyone is a music critic. Food! Screamed the one-armed ghoul, lunging at me with its 5 remaining claws. I tried to suck in my gut. I really did. But oh, cursed flab, if I had been in my godly form, the ghoul's claws never would have connected. My hammered bronze abs would have scoffed at the monster's attempt to reach them. Alas, Lester's body failed me yet again. The Uranomos raked its hand across my midsection, just below my ukulele. The tip of its middle finger, barely, just barely, found flesh. Its claw sliced through my shirt and across my belly like a dull razor. I tumbled sideways off Jason's coffin, warm blood trickling into the waistline of my trousers. Hazel Levesque yelled in defiance. She vaulted over the coffin and drove her spatha straight through the Uranomos' clavicle, creating the world's first ghoul on a stick. The Uranomos screamed and lurched backwards, ripping the spatha from Hazel's grip. The wound smoked before where the imperial gold blade had entered. Then, there is no delicate way to put it, the ghoul burst into steaming, crumbling chunks of ash. The spatha clanged to the stone floor. The second ghoul had stopped to face Meg, as one does when one has been slashed across the thighs by an annoying 12-year-old, but when its comrade cried out, it spun to face us. This gave Meg an opening, but instead of striking, she pushed past the monster and ran straight to my side, her blades retracting back into her rings. "You okay?" she demanded. "Oh no, you're bleeding. You said don't get scratched. You got scratched." I wasn't sure whether to be touched by her concern or annoyed by her tone. "I didn't plan it, Meg." "Guys!" yelled Lavinia. The ghoul stepped forward, positioning itself between Hazel and her fallen spatha. Don continued to cower like a champ. Lavinia's manual ballista remained only half primed. Meg and I were now wedged side by side next to Jason's coffin. That left Hazel empty-handed as the only obstacle between the Euronymous and a 5-course meal. The creature hissed, "You cannot win." Its voice changed. Its tone became deeper. Its volume modulated. "You will join your comrades in my tomb." Between my throbbing head and my aching gut, I had trouble following the words, but Hazel seemed to understand. "Who are you?" she demanded. "How about you stop hiding behind your creatures and show yourself?" The Euronymous blinked. Its eyes turned from milky white to a glowing purple, like iodine flames. "Hazel Levesque, you of all people should understand the fragile boundary between life and death. But don't be afraid, I will save a special place for you, at my side, along with your beloved Frank. You will make glorious skeletons." Hazel clenched her fists. When she glanced back at us, her expression was almost as intimidating as the ghouls. "Back up," she warned us, "as far as you can." Meg half dragged me to the front end of the coffin. My gut felt like it had been stitched with molten hot zip. Lavinia grabbed Don by his t-shirt collar and pulled him to a safer, cowering spot. The ghoul chuckled. "How will you defeat me, Hazel? With this?" It kicked the spaffer further away behind him. "I have summoned more undead. They will soon be here." Despite my pain, I struggled to get up. I couldn't leave Hazel by herself, but Lavinia put a hand on my shoulder. "Wait," she murmured. "Hazel's got this." That seemed ridiculously optimistic, but to my shame I stayed put. More warm blood soaked into my underwear. At least I hoped it was blood. The Euronymous wiped drool from its mouth with one clawed finger. "Unless you intend to run and abandon that lovely coffin, you might as well surrender. You are strong underground, daughter of Pluto. Too strong for you." "Oh," Hazel's voice remained steady, almost conversational. "Strong underground. That's good to know." The tunnel shook. Cracks appeared in the walls, jagged fissures branching up the stone. Beneath the ghoul's feet, a column of white quartz erupted, skewering the monster against the ceiling and reducing it to a cloud of vulture feather confetti. Hazel faced us as if nothing remarkable had happened. "Don, Lavinia, get this." She looked uneasily at the coffin. "Get this out of here, you..." She pointed at Meg. "Help your friend, please. We have healers at camp who can deal with that ghoul scratch." "Wait," I said. "What just happened? Its voice." "I've seen that happen before with a ghoul," Hazel said, grimly. "I'll explain later. Right now, get going. I'll follow in a sec." I started to protest, but Hazel stopped me with a shake of her head. "I'm just going to pick up my sword and make sure no more of those things can follow us. Go!" Rubble trickled from new cracks in the ceiling. Perhaps leaving wasn't such a bad idea. Leaning on Meg, I managed to stagger further down the tunnel. Lavinia and Don lugged Jason's coffin. I was in so much pain I didn't have the energy to yell at Lavinia to carry it like a couch. We'd gone perhaps 50 feet when the tunnel behind us rumbled even more strongly than before. I looked back just in time to get hit in the face by a billowing cloud of debris. "Hazel!" Lavinia called into the swirling dust. A heartbeat later, Hazel Levesque emerged, coated from head to toe in glittering powdered quartz. Her sword glowed in her hand. "I'm fine," she announced, "but nobody's going to be sneaking out that way anymore. Now," she pointed at the coffin, "somebody want to tell me who's in there?" I really didn't. Not after I'd seen how Hazel skewered her enemies. Still, I owed it to Jason. Hazel had been his friend. I steeled my nerves, opened my mouth to speak, and was beaten to the punchline by Hazel herself. "It's Jason," she said, as if the information had been whispered in her ear. "Oh, gods." She ran to the coffin. She felt at her knees and threw her arms across the lid. She let out a single devastated sob. Then she lowered her head and shivered in silence. Strands of her hair sketched through the quartz dust on the polished wood surface, leaving squiggly lines like the readings of a seismograph. Without looking up, she murmured, "I had nightmares. A boat, a man on a horse, a spear. How did it happen?" I did my best to explain. I told her about my fall into the mortal world, my adventures with Meg, our fight aboard Caligula's yacht, and how Jason had died saving us. Recounting the story brought back all the pain and terror. I remembered the sharp ozone smell of the wind spirits swirling around Meg and Jason, the bite of zip-tie handcuffs around my wrists, Caligula's pitiless, delighted boast, "You don't walk away from me alive." It was all so awful. I momentarily forgot about the agonizing cut across my belly. Lavinia stared at the floor. Meg did her best to staunch my bleeding with one of the extra dresses from her backpack. Don watched the ceiling, where a new crack was zigzagging over our heads. "Hate to interrupt," said the fawn, "but maybe we should continue this outside?" Hazel pressed her fingers against the coffin lid. I'm so angry with you. Doing this to Piper, to us, not letting us be there for you. What were you thinking?" It took me a moment to realise she wasn't talking to us. She was speaking to Jason. Slowly she stood. Her mouth trembled. She straightened as if summoning internal columns of quartz to brace her skeletal system. "Let me carry one side," she said. "Let's bring him home." We trudged along in silence, the sorriest pallbearers ever. All of us were covered in dust and monster ash. At the front of the coffin, Lavinia squirmed in her armour, occasionally glancing over at Hazel, who walked with her eyes straight ahead. She didn't even seem to notice the random vulture feather fluttering from her shirt sleeve. Meg and Don carried the back of the casket. Meg's eyes were bruising up nicely from the car crash, making her look like a large, badly dressed raccoon. Don kept twitching, tilting his head to the left as he wanted to hear what his shoulder was saying. I stumbled after them, Meg's spare dress pressed against my gut. The bleeding seemed to have stopped, but the cut still burned and needled. I hoped Hazel was right about her healers being able to fix me. I did not relish the idea of becoming an extra for The Walking Dead. Hazel's calmness made me uneasy. I would almost have preferred it if she'd screamed and thrown things at me. Her misery was like the cold gravity of a mountain. You could stand next to that mountain and close your eyes, and even if you couldn't see it or hear it, you knew it was there. Unspeakably heavy and powerful, a geological force so ancient it made even immortal gods feel like gnats. I feared what would happen if Hazel's emotions turned volcanically active. At last, we emerged into the open air. We stood on a rock promontory about halfway up a hillside, with a valley of New Rome spread out below. In the twilight, the hills had turned violet. The cool breeze smelled of wood, smoke and lilacs. "Wow," said Meg, taking in the view. Just as I remembered, the little Tiber wended its way across the valley floor, making a glittering circuli that emptied into a blue lake where the camp's belly button might have been. On the north shore of that lake rose New Rome itself, a smaller version of the original imperial city. From what Leo had said about the recent battle, I'd expected to see the place levelled. At this distance, though, in the waning light, everything looked normal. The gleaming white buildings with red tile roofs, the domed Senate House, the Circus Maximus and the Colosseum. The lake's south shore was the site of Temple Hill, with its chaotic assortment of shrines and monuments. On the summit, overshadowing everything else, was my father's impressively egotastic Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. If possible, his Roman incantation, Jupiter, was even more insufferable than his original Greek personality of Zeus. And yes, we gods have multiple personalities because you mortals keep changing your minds about what we're like. It's exasperating. In the past, I'd always hated looking at Temple Hill because my shrine wasn't the largest. Obviously, it should have been the largest. Now, I hated looking at the place for a different reason. All I could think of was the diorama Meg was carrying and the sketchbooks in her backpack, the designs for Temple Hill as Jason Grace had reimagined it. Compared to Jason's poster board display, with its handwritten notes and glued-on Monopoly tokens, the real Temple Hill seemed an unworthy tribute to the gods. It could never mean as much as Jason's goodness, his fervent desire to honour every god and leave no one out. I forced myself to look away. Directly below, about half a mile from our ledge, stood Camp Jupiter itself, with its picketed walls, watchtowers and trenches, its neat rows of barracks lining two principal streets. It could have been any Roman legion camp, anywhere in the old empire, at any time during Rome's many centuries of rule. Romans were so consistent about how they built their forts, whether they meant to stay there for a night or a decade, that if you knew one camp, you knew them all. You could wake up in the dead of night, stumble around in total darkness, and know exactly where everything was. Of course, when I visited Roman camps, I usually spent all my time in the commander's tent, lounging and eating grapes like I used to with Commodus. Oh, gods, why was I torturing myself with such thoughts? Okay, Hazel's voice shook me out of my reverie. When we get to camp, here's the story. Lavinia, you went to Temescal on my orders, because you saw the hearse go over the railing. I stayed on duty until the next shift arrived. Then I rushed down to help you, because I thought you might be in danger. We fought the ghouls, saved these guys, etc. Got it? So, about that, Don interrupted. I'm sure you guys can manage from here, right? Seeing as you might get in trouble or whatever, I'll just be slipping off. Lavinia gave him a hard stare. Or I can stick around, he said hastily. You know, happy to help. Hazel shifted her grip on the coffin's handle. Remember, we're an honour guard. No matter how bedraggled we look, we have a duty. We're bringing home a fallen comrade. Understood? Yes, Centurion, Lavinia said sheepishly. And Hazel? Thanks. Hazel winced, as if regretting her soft heart. Once we get to the Principia. Her eyes settled on me. Our visiting god can explain to the leadership what happened to Jason Grace. Chapter 5. Hi everybody, here's a little tune I call All the Ways I Suck. The Legion sentries spotted us from a long way off, as Legion sentries are supposed to do. By the time our small band arrived at the fort's main gates, a crowd had gathered. Demigods lined either side of the street and watched in curious silence as we carried Jason's coffin through the camp. No one questioned us, no one tried to stop us. The weight of all those eyes was oppressive. Hazel led us straight down the Via Praetoria. Some legionnaires stood on the porches of their barracks, their half-polished armour temporarily forgotten, guitars set aside, card games unfinished. Glowing purple lairs, the house gods of the Legion, milled about, drifting through walls or people, with little regard for personal space. Giant eagles whirled overhead, eyeing us like potentially tasty rodents. I began to realise how sparse the crowd was. The camp seemed not deserted exactly, but only half full. A few young heroes walked on crutches, others had arms in casts. Perhaps some of them were just in their barracks, or in the sick bay, or in an extended march. But I didn't like the haunted, grief-stricken expressions of the legionnaires who watched us. I remembered the gloating words of the Eurynomos at Lake Temescal. I have already tasted the flesh of your comrades. At the blood moon you will join them. I wasn't sure what a blood moon was. Lunar things were more my sister's department, but I didn't like the sound of it. I'd had quite enough of blood. From the looks of the legionnaires, so had they. Then I thought about something else the ghoul had said. You will all join the king's dead. I thought about the words of the prophecy we'd received in the burning maze, and a troubling realization started to form in my head. I did my best to suppress it. I'd already had my full day's quota of terror. We passed the storefronts of merchants who were allowed to operate inside the fort's walls. Only the most essential services, like a chariot dealership, an armory, a gladiator supply store, and a coffee bar. In front of the coffee place stood a two-headed barista, glowering at us with both faces, his green apron stained with latte foam. Finally, we reached the main intersection, where two roads came to a T in front of the Principia. On the steps of the gleaming white headquarters building, the Legion's praetors waited for us. I almost didn't recognise Frank Zhang. The first time I'd seen him, back when I was a god and he was a Legion newbie, Frank had been a baby-faced, heavy-set boy with dark, flat-top hair and an adorable fixation on archery. He'd had this idea that I might be his father. He prayed to me all the time. Honestly, he was so cute I would have been happy to adopt him, but alas, he was one of Mars's. The second time I saw Frank, during his voyage on the Argo II, he'd had a growth spurt or a magical testosterone injection or something. He'd grown taller, stronger, more imposing, though still in an adorable, cuddly, grizzly bear sort of way. Now, as I'd often noticed happening with young men still coming into their own, Frank's weight had begun to catch up with his growth spurt. He was once again a big, girthy guy, with baby cheeks you just wanted to pinch, only now he was larger and more muscular. He'd apparently fallen out of bed and scrambled to meet us, despite it being just early evening. His hair stuck up on top like a breaking wave. One of his jean cuffs was tucked into his sock. His top was a yellow silk nightshirt decorated with eagles and bears, a fashion statement he was doing his best to cover with his purple praetor's cloak. One thing that hadn't changed was his bearing, that slightly awkward stance, that faint, perplexed frown, as if he were constantly thinking, am I really supposed to be here? That feeling was understandable. Frank had climbed the ranks from probatio to centurion to praetor in record time. Not since Julius Caesar had a Roman officer risen so rapidly and brightly. That wasn't a comparison I would have shared with Frank, though, given that what happened to my man Julius? My gaze drifted to the young woman at Frank's side, Praetor Reina Avila Ramirez Arellano, and I remembered. A bowling ball of panic formed in my heart and rolled into my lower intestines. It was a good thing I wasn't carrying Jason's coffin, or I would have dropped it. How can I explain this to you? Have you ever had an experience so painful or embarrassing you literally forgot it happened? Your mind dissociates, scuttles away from the incident, yelling, nope, 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 and refuses to acknowledge the memory ever again. That was me with Reina Avila Ramirez Arellano. Oh yes, I knew who she was. I was familiar with her name and reputation. I was fully aware we were destined to run into her at Camp Jupiter. The prophecy we'd deciphered in the burning maze had told me as much. But my fuzzy mortal brain had completely refused to make the most important connection, that this Reina was that Reina, the one whose face I had been shown long ago by a certain annoying goddess of love. That's her, my brain screamed at me, as I stood before her in my flabby and acne-spotted glory, clutching a bloody dress to my gut. Oh, wow, she's beautiful. Now you recognise her, I mentally screamed back. Now you want to talk about her. Can't you please forget again? But, remember what Venus said, my brain insisted. You're supposed to stay away from Reina or Yes, I remember. Shut up. You have conversations like this with your brain, don't you? It's completely normal, right? Raina was indeed beautiful and imposing. Her imperial gold armour was cloaked in a mantle of purple. Military medals twinkled on her chest. Her dark ponytail swept over her shoulder like a horsewhip, and her obsidian eyes were every bit as piercing as those of the eagles that circled above us. I managed to wrest my eyes from her. My face burned with humiliation. I could still hear the other gods laughing after Venus made her proclamation to me, her dire warnings if I should ever dare... Ping! Lavinia's manuballista chose that moment to crank itself another half-notch, mercifully diverting everyone's attention to her. So, she stammered, we were on duty when I saw this hearse go flying over the guardrail. Raina raised her hand for silence. Centurion Levesque. Raina's tone was guarded and weary, as if we weren't the first battered procession to tote a coffin into camp. Your report, please. Hazel glanced at the other pallbearers. Together, they gently lowered the casket. Praetors, Hazel said, we rescued these travellers at the borders of camp. This is Meg. Hi, said Meg. Is there a bathroom? I really need to pee. Hazel looked flustered. In a sec, Meg. And this? She hesitated, as if she couldn't believe what she was about to say. This is Apollo. The crowd murmured uneasily. I caught snatches of their conversations. Did she say? Not actually. Dude, obviously not. Named after? In his dreams. Settle down, Frank Zhang ordered, pulling his purple mantle tighter around his pyjama top. He studied me, perhaps looking at any sign that I was in fact Apollo, the god he'd always admired. He blinked as if the concept had short-circuited his brain. Hazel, can you explain that? He pleaded. And, the coffin. Hazel locked her golden eyes on me, giving me a silent command. Tell them. I didn't know how to start. I was not a great orator like Julius or Cicero. I wasn't a weaver of tall tales like Hermes. Boy, that guy can tell some whoppers. How could I explain the many months of horrifying experiences that had led to Megami standing here with the body of our heroic friend? I looked down at my ukulele. I thought of Piper McLean aboard Caligula's yachts, how she'd burst into singing Life of Illusion in the midst of a gang of hardened mercenaries. She had rendered them helpless, entranced by her serenade about melancholy and regret. I wasn't a charm speaker like Piper, but I was a musician, and surely Jason deserved a tribute. And what had happened with the Euronomoi? I felt skittish about my ukulele, so I began to sing a cappella. For the first few bars, my voice quavered. I had no idea what I was doing. The words simply billowed up from deep inside me like the clouds of debris from Hazel's collapsed tunnel. I sang of my fall from Olympus, how I had landed in New York and become bound to Meg McCaffrey. I sang of our time at Camp Half-Blood, where we discovered the Triumvirate's plot to control the great oracles and thus the future of the world. I sang of Meg's childhood, her terrible years of mental abuse in the household of Nero, and how we'd finally driven that emperor from the grove of Dodona. I sang of our battle against Commodus at the way station in Indianapolis, of our harrowing journey into Caligula's burning maze to free the Sibyl of Eretria. After each verse I sang a refrain about Jason, his final stand on Caligula's yacht, courageously facing death so that we could survive and continue our quest. Everything we had been through led to Jason's sacrifice. Everything that might come next, if we were lucky enough to defeat the Triumvirate and Python at Delphi, would be possible because of him. The song wasn't really about me at all. I know, I could hardly believe it either. It was the fall of Jason Grace. In the last verses I sang of Jason's dream for Temple Hill, his plan to add shrines, until every god and goddess, no matter how obscure, was properly honoured. I took the diorama from Meg, lifted it to show the assembled demigods, and then set it on Jason's coffin like a soldier's flag. I'm not sure how long I sang. When I finished the last line, the sky was fully dark. My throat felt as hot and dry as a spent bullet cartridge. The giant eagles had gathered on the nearby rooftops. They stared at me with something like respect. The legionnaires' faces were streaked with tears. Some sniffled and wiped their noses. Others embraced and wept silently. I realised they weren't just grieving for Jason. The song had unleashed the collective sorrow about the recent battle, their losses, which, given the sparseness of the crowd, must have been extreme. Jason's song became their song. By honouring him, we honoured all the fallen. On the steps of the Principia, the praetors stirred from their private anguish. Raina took a long, shaky breath. She exchanged a look with Frank, who was having difficulty controlling the tremble of his lower lip. The two leaders seemed to come to silent agreement. We will have a state funeral, Raina announced. And we'll realise Jason's dream, Frank added. Those temples and everything His voice caught on Jason's name. He needed a count of 5 to compose himself. Everything he envisioned We'll build it all in one weekend. I could feel the mood of the crowd change, as palpably as a weather front, their grief hardening into steely determination. Some nodded and murmured assent. A few shouted, "Away! Hail!" The rest of the crowd picked up the chant. Javelins pounded against shields. No one balked at the idea of rebuilding Temple Hill in a weekend. A task like that would have been impossible even for the most skilled engineering corps. But this was a Roman legion. "Apollo and Meg will be guests of Camp Jupiter," Rayner said. "We will find them a place to stay." "And a bathroom," Meg pleaded, dancing with her knees crossed. Rayner managed a faint smile. "Of course. Together we'll mourn and honour our dead. Afterwards we will discuss our plan of war." The legionnaires cheered and banged their shields. I opened my mouth to say something eloquent, so to thank Rayner and Frank for their hospitality. But all my remaining energy had been expanded in my song. My gut wound burned. My head twirled on my neck like a carousel. I fell, face first, and bit the dirt. Chapter 6. Sailing north to war with my Shirley Temple and 3 cherries. Fear me. Oh, the dreams. Dear reader, if you are tired of hearing about my awful prophetic nightmares, I don't blame you. Just think how I felt experiencing them firsthand. It was like having the Pythia of Delphi butt dial me all night long, mumbling lines of prophecy I hadn't asked for and didn't want to hear. I saw a line of luxury yachts cutting through moonlit waves of the California coast, 50 boats in a tight chevron formation, strings of lights gleaming along their bows, purple pennants snapping in the wind on illuminated comm towers. The decks were crawling with all manner of monsters, cyclopses, wild centaurs, big-eared pandai, and chest-headed blemi. On the aft deck of each yacht, a mob of the creatures seemed to be constructing something like a shed or some sort of siege weapon. My dream zoomed in on the bridge of the lead ship. The crew hustled about, checking monitors and adjusting instruments. Lounging behind them, in matching gold-upholstered lazy-boy recliners, were 2 of my least favourite people in the world. On the left sat the Emperor Commodus. His pastel blue beach shorts showed off his perfect tanned calves and pedicured bare feet. His grey Indianapolis Colts hoodie was unzipped over his bare chest and perfectly sculpted abs. He had a lot of nerve wearing Colts gear, since we'd humiliated him in the team's home stadium only a few weeks before. Of course, we'd humiliated ourselves too, but I wanted to forget that part. His face was almost as I remembered, annoyingly handsome, with a haughty chiselled profile and ringlets of golden hair framing his brow. The skin around his eyes, however, looked as if it had been sandblasted. His pupils were cloudy. The last time we'd met, I had blinded him with a burst of godly radiance, and it was obvious he still hadn't healed. That was the only thing that pleased me about seeing him again. On the other recliner sat Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, otherwise known as Caligula. Rage tinted my dream blood pink. How could he lounge there so relaxed in his ridiculous captain's outfit, those white slacks and boat shoes, that navy jacket over a striped collarless shirt, that officer's hat tilted at a rakish angle on his walnut curls, when only a few days before he had killed Jason Grace? How dare he sip a refreshing iced beverage garnished with 3 maraschino cherries, 3 monstrous, and smile with such self-satisfaction? Caligula looked human enough, but I knew better than to credit him with any sort of compassion. I wanted to strangle him. Alas, I could do nothing except watch and fume. "Pilot," Caligula called out lazily. "What's our speed?" "5 knots, sir, and said one of the uniformed mortals. "Should I increase?" No. Caligula plucked out one of the maraschino cherries and popped it into his mouth. He chewed and grinned, showing bright red teeth. "In fact, let's slow to 4 knots. The journey is half the fun." "Yes, sir." Commodus scowled. He swirled the ice in his own drink, which was clear and bubbly with red syrup pooled at the bottom. He only had 2 maraschino cherries, no doubt because Caligula would never allow Commodus to equal him in anything. "I don't understand why we're moving so slowly," Commodus grumbled. "At top speed, we could have been there by now." Caligula chuckled. "My friend, it's all about timing. We have to allow our deceased ally his best window of attack." Commodus shuddered. "I hate our deceased ally. Are you sure he can be controlled? We've discussed this." Caligula's sing-song tone was light and airy and pleasantly homicidal, as if to say, "The next time you question me, I will control you with some cyanide in your beverage." "You should trust me, Commodus. Remember who aided you in your hour of need." "I've thanked you a dozen times already," Commodus said. "Besides, it wasn't my fault. How was I supposed to know Apollo still had some light left in him?" He blinked painfully. "He got the better of you, and your horse too." A cloud passed over Caligula's face. "Yes, well, soon we'll make things right. Between your troops and mine, we have more than enough power to overwhelm the battered 12th Legion, and if they prove too stubborn to surrender, we always have Plan B. He called over his shoulder. Oh, boost! A pandos hurried in from the aft deck, his enormous shaggy ears flopping around him like throw rugs. In his hands was a large sheet of paper, folded into sections like a map or a set of instructions. Yes, Princeps. Progress report. Ah, Boost's dark furry face twitched. Good, master. Another week? A week, Caligula said. Well, sir, these instructions. Boost turned the paper upside down and frowned at it. We are still locating all the slot A's and assembly P7s, and they did not send us enough lug nuts, and the batteries required are not standard size, so... A week, Caligula repeated, his tone still pleasant. Yet the blood moon will rise in... The pandos winced. 5 days? So you can have your work done in 5 days. Excellent. Carry on. Boost gulped and then scuttled away as fast as his furry feet could carry him. Caligula smiled at his fellow emperor. You see, Commodus, soon Camp Jupiter will be ours. With luck, the Sibylline books will be in our hands as well. Then we'll have some proper bargaining power. When it's time to face Python and carve up our portions of the world, you'll remember who helped you and who did not. Oh, I'll remember, stupid Nero. Commodus poked the ice cubes in the drink. Which one is this again? The Shirley Temple? No, that's the Roy Rogers, Caligula said. Mine is the Shirley Temple. And you're sure this is what modern warriors drink when they go into battle? Absolutely, Caligula said. Now enjoy the ride, my friend. You have 5 whole days to work on your tan and get your vision back. Then we'll have some lovely carnage in the Bay Area. The scene vanished, and I fell into cold darkness. I found myself in a dimly lit stone chamber, filled with shuffling, stinking, groaning undead. Some were as withered as Egyptian mummies. Others looked almost alive, except for the ghastly wounds that had killed them. At the far end of the room, between 2 rough-hewn columns, sat a presence, wreathed in a magenta haze. It raised its skeletal visage, fixing me with its burning purple eyes, the same eyes that had stared out at me from the possessed ghoul in the tunnel, and began to laugh. My gut wound ignited like a line of gunpowder. I woke, screaming in agony. I found myself shaking and sweating in a strange room. You too? Meg asked. She stood next to my bed, leaning out of an open window and digging in a window box. Her gardening belt's pockets sagged with bulbs, seed pockets, and packets and tools. In one muddy hand she held a trowel. Children of Demeter. You can't take them anywhere without them playing in the dirt. What's going on? I tried to sit up, which was a mistake. My gut wound really was a fiery line of agony. I looked down and found my bare midsection wrapped in bandages that smelled of healing herbs and ointments. If the camp's healers had already treated me, why was I still in so much pain? Where are we? I croaked. Coffee shop. Even by Meg's standards, that statement seemed ridiculous. Our room had no coffee bar, no espresso machine, no barista, no yummy pastries. It was a simple whitewashed cube with a camp bed against either wall, an open window between them and a trapdoor in the far corner, which led me to believe we were on an upper story. We might have been in a prison cell, except there were no bars at the window, and a prison bed would have been more comfortable. Yes, I am sure I did some research on Folsom Prison with Johnny Cash. Long story. The coffee shop is downstairs, Meg clarified. This is Bombillow's spare room. I remembered the 2-headed, green-aproned barista who had scouted us on the Via Praetoria. I wondered why he would have been kind enough to give us a lodging, and why, of all places, the Legion had decided to put us here. Why exactly? Lemurian spice, Meg said. Bombillo had the nearest supply. The healers needed it for your wound. She shrugged. Like healers, what can you do? Then she went back to planting iris bulbs. I sniffed at my bandages. One of the scents I detected was indeed Lemurian spice. Effective stuff against the undead, though the Lemurian festival wasn't until June, and it was barely April. No wonder we'd end up in the coffee shop. Every year retailers seem to start Lemurian season earlier and earlier. Lemurian spice lattes, Lemurian spice muffins, as if we couldn't wait to celebrate the season of exorcising evil spirits with pastries that tasted faintly of lima beans and grave dust. Yum. What else did I smell in that healing balm? Crocus? Myrrh? Unicorn horn shavings? Oh, these Roman healers were good. Then why didn't I feel better? They don't want to move you too many times, Meg said, so we just kind of stayed here. It's okay, bathroom downstairs, and free coffee. You don't drink coffee. I do now. I shuddered. A caffeinated Meg. Just what I need. How long have I been out? Day and a half? What? You needed sleep. Also, you're less annoying unconscious. I didn't have the energy for a proper retort. I rubbed the gunk out of my eyes and then forced myself to sit up, fighting down the pain and nausea. Meg studied me with concern, which must have meant I looked even worse than I felt. "How bad?" she asked. "I'm okay," I lied. "What did you mean earlier, when you said you too?" Her expression closed up like a hurricane shutter. "Nightmares. I woke up screaming a couple of times. You slept through it, but, She picked a clod of dirt off her trowel. "This place reminds me of... you know." I regretted I hadn't thought about that sooner. After Meg's experience growing up in Nero's imperial household, surrounded by Latin-speaking servants and guards in Roman armour, purple banners, all the regalia of the old empire, of course Camp Jupiter must have triggered unwelcome memories. "I'm sorry," I said. "Did you dream anything I should know about?" "The usual." Her tone made it clear she didn't want to elaborate. "What about you?" "I thought about my dream of the two emperors sailing leisurely in our direction, drinking cherry-garnished mocktails while their troops rushed to assemble secret weapons they'd ordered from IKEA. Our deceased ally. Plan B. 5 days. I saw those burning purple eyes in a chamber filled with the undead. The king's dead." "The usual," I agreed. "Help me up." It hurt to stand, but if I'd been lying in that bed for a day and a half, I wanted to move before my muscles turned to tapioca. Also, I was beginning to realise I was hungry and thirsty, and in the immortal words of Meg McCaffrey, I needed to pee. Human bodies are annoying that way. I braced myself against the windowsill and peered outside. Below, demigods bustled along the Via Praetoria, carrying supplies, reporting for duty assignments, hurrying between the barracks and the mess hall. The pile of shock and grief seemed to have faded. Now everyone looked busy and determined. Craning my head and looking south, I could see Temple Hill abuzz with activity. Siege engines had been converted to cranes and earth movers. Scaffolding had been erected in a dozen locations. The sounds of hammering and stone cutting echoed across the valley. From my vantage point, I could identify at least 10 new small shrines and 2 large temples that hadn't been there when we arrived, with more in the works. "Wow," I murmured. "Those Romans don't mess around." "Tonight's the funeral for Jason," Meg informed me. "They're trying to finish work before then." Judging from the angle of the sun, I guessed it was about 2 in the afternoon. Given their pace so far, I figured that would give the Legion ample time to finish Temple Hill, maybe construct a sports stadium or 2 before dinner. Jason would have been proud. I wished he could have been here to see what he had inspired. My vision fluttered and darkened. I thought I might be passing out again. Then I realised something large and dark had in fact fluttered right in my face, straight from the open window. I turned and found a raven sitting on my bed. It ruffled its oily feathers, regarding me with a beady black eye. "Squawk!" "Meg," I said, "are you seeing this?" "Yeah." She didn't even look up from her iris bulbs. "Hey, Frank, what's up?" The bird shape shifted, its form swelling into that of a bulky human, its feathers melting into cloves, until Frank Zhang sat before us, his hair now properly washed and combed, his silk nightshirt changed for a purple Camp Jupiter tee. "Hey, Meg," he said, as if it were completely normal to change species during a conversation. "Everything's on schedule. I was just checking to see if Apollo was awake, which obviously he is." He gave me an awkward wave. "I mean, you are, since I'm sitting on your bed. I should get up." He rose, tugged at his shirt, and then didn't seem to know what to do with his hands. At one time, I would have been used to such nervous behaviour from mortals I encountered, but now it took me a moment to realise Frank was still in awe of me. Perhaps, being a shapeshifter, Frank was more willing than most to believe that, despite my unimpressive mortal appearance, I was still the same old god of archery inside. "You see? I told you Frank was adorable." "Anyway," he continued, "Meg, I have been talking. The last day or so, while you were passed out. I mean, recovering, sleeping, you know. It's fine. You needed sleep. Hope you feel better." Despite how terrible I felt, I couldn't help but smile. "You've been very kind to us, Praetor Sang. Thank you." Sure, it's, an honour seeing you as you were." Frank," Meg turned from her window box. "It's just Lester. Don't treat him like a big deal." "Now, Meg," I said, "if Frank wants to treat me like a big deal, Frank, just tell him." The Praetor glanced back and forth between us, as if making sure the Meg and Apollo show was over for now. "So, Meg, explain the prophecy you got in the burning maze. Apollo faces death in Tarquin's tomb, unless the doorway to the soundless god is opened by Bellona's daughter, right?" I shivered. I didn't want to be reminded of those words, especially given my dreams, and the implication that I would soon face death. Been there, done that, got the belly wound. "Yes," I said warily. "I don't suppose you've figured out what those lines mean and have already undertaken the necessary quests?" Not exactly," Frank said, "but the prophecy did answer a few questions about, well, about what's been happening around here. It gave Ella and Tyson enough information to work with. They think they might have a lead. Ella and Tyson, I said, sifting through my foggy mortal brain. The Harpy and the Cyclops who have been working to reconstruct the Sibylline books. Those are the ones, Frank agreed. If you're feeling up to it, I thought we could have a walk into New Rome. Chapter 7. Nice stroll into town. Happy birthday to Lester. Here's some gift-wrapped pain. I did not feel up to it. My gut hurt terribly. My legs could barely support my weight. Even after using the toilet, washing, dressing and grabbing a Lemurian spice latte and a muffin from our grumpy host, Bombilo, I didn't see how I could walk the mile or so to New Rome. I had no desire to find out more about the prophecy from the burning maze. I didn't want to face more impossible challenges, especially after my dream about that thing in the tomb. I didn't even want to be human. But alas, I had no choice. What do mortals say? Suck it up? I sucked it away, way, way up. Meg stayed at camp. She had an appointment in an hour to feed the unicorns with Lavinia, and Meg was afraid if she went anywhere she might miss it. Given Lavinia's reputation for going AWOL, I supposed Meg's concern was valid. Frank led me through the main gates. The sentries snapped to attention. They had to hold that pose for quite a while since I was moving at the speed of a cough syrup. I caught them studying me apprehensively, perhaps because they were worried I might launch into another heartbreaking song, or perhaps because they still couldn't believe this shambling heap of adolescence had once been the god Apollo. The afternoon was California perfect. Turquoise sky, golden grass rippling on the hillsides, eucalyptus and cedar rustling in the warm breeze. This should have dispelled any thoughts of dark tunnels and ghouls, yet I couldn't seem to get the smell of grave dust out of my nostrils. Drinking a Lemurian spice latte did not help. Frank walked at my speed, staying close enough for me to lean on him if I felt shaky, but not insisting on helping. So, he said at last, what's with you and Raina? I stumbled, sending fresh jabs of pain through my abdomen. What? Nothing. What? Frank brushed a raven feather off his cloak. I wondered how that worked, exactly, being left with bits and pieces after shape-shifting. Did he ever discard a spare feather and realise later, whoops, that was my pinky finger? I'd heard rumours that Frank could even turn into a swarm of bees. Even I, a former god who used to transform all the time, had no idea how he managed that. It's just that, when you saw Raina, he said, you froze like, I don't know, you realised you owed her money or something? I had to restrain a bitter laugh. If only my problem regarding Raina was as simple as that. The incident had come back to me with glass-shard clarity. Venus scolding me, warning me, upbraiding me as only she could. You will not stick your ugly, unworthy, godly face anywhere near her, or I swear on the sticks. And of course she'd done this in the throne room, in the presence of all the other Olympians, as they howled with cruel amusement and shouted, "Oh!" Even my father had joined in. Oh yes, he loved every minute of it. I shuddered. There is nothing with Raina and me, I said quite honestly. I don't think we've ever exchanged more than a few words. Frank studied my expression. Obviously he realised I was holding something back, but he didn't push. Okay, well, you'll see her tonight at the funeral. She's trying to get some sleep right now. I almost asked why Raina would be asleep in the middle of the afternoon. Then I remembered that Frank had been wearing a pyjama shirt when we'd encountered him at dinner time. Had that really been the day before yesterday? You're taking shifts, I realised. So, one of you is always on duty? It's the only way, he agreed. We're still on high alert. Everyone is edgy. There's so much to do since the battle. He said the word battle the same way Hazel had, as if it was a singular, terrible turning point in history. Like all the divinations Meg and I had retrieved during our adventures, the dark prophecy's nightmarish prediction about Camp Jupiter remained burned into my mind. The words that memory wrought are set to fire. Ere new moon rises over the devil's mount, the changeling lord shall face a challenge dire, till bodies fill the Tiber beyond count. After hearing that, Leo Valdez had raced cross-country on his bronze dragon, hoping to warn the camp. According to Leo, he had arrived just in time, but the toll had still been horrendous. Frank must have read my pained expression. It would have been worse if it hadn't been for you, he said, which only made me feel guiltier. If you hadn't sent Leo here to warn us, one day out of nowhere, he just flew right in. That must have been quite a shock, I said, since you thought Leo was dead. Frank's dark eyes glittered like they still belonged to a raven. Yeah, we were so mad at him for making us worry, we lined up and took turns hitting him. We did that at Camp Half-Blood too, I said. Greek minds think alike. Frank's gaze drifted towards the horizon. We had about 24 hours to prepare. It helped, but it wasn't enough. They came from over there. He pointed north to the Berkeley Hills. They swarmed, only way to describe it. Had fought undead before, but this, he shook his head. Hazel called them zombies. My grandmother would have called them Jiangxi. The Romans have a lot of words for them. Immortuus, lamia, nuntius. Messenger, I said, translating the last word. It had always seemed an odd term to me. A messenger from whom? Not Hades. He hated it when corpses wandered around the mortal world, made him look like a sloppy warden. The Greeks call them vaikolakai, I said. Usually it's rare to see even one. There were hundreds, Frank said, along with dozens of those other ghoul things, the Uranomai, acting as herders. We cut them down. They just kept coming. You'd think having a fire-breathing dragon would have been a game-changer, but Festus could only do so much. The undead aren't as flammable as you might think. Hades had explained that to me once, in one of his famously awkward, too-much-information attempts at small talk. Flames didn't deter the undead. They just wandered right through, no matter how extra crispy they became. That's why he didn't use the Phlegathon, the river of fire, as the boundary of his kingdom. Running water, however, especially the dark magical waters of the river Styx, was a different story. I studied the glittering current of the little Tiber. Suddenly a line of the dark prophecy made sense to me. Bodies filled the Tiber, beyond count. You stopped them at the river. Frank nodded. They don't like fresh water. That's where we turned the battle. But that line about bodies beyond count, it doesn't mean what you think. Then what? Halt! Yelled a voice right in front of me. I'd been so lost in Frank's story that I hadn't realised how close we were to getting to the city. I hadn't even noticed the statue at the side of the road until it screamed at me. Terminus, the god of boundaries, looked just as I remembered him. From the waist up, he was a finely sculpted man with a large nose, curly hair and a disgruntled expression, which may have been because no one had ever carved him a pair of arms. From the waist down, he was a block of white marble. I used to tease him that he should try skinny jeans, as they'd be very slimming. From the way he glowered at me, I guessed he remembered those insults. Well, well, he said, who do we have here? I sighed. Terminus, can we not? No, he barked. No, we cannot not. I need to see identification. Frank cleared his throat. Terminus. He tapped the praetor's laurels on his breastplate. Yes, Praetor Frank Zhang, you are good to go. But your friend here? Terminus, I protested. You know very well who I am. Identification! A cold, slimy feeling spread outward from my Lemurian-spiced bandaged gut. Oh, you can't mean ID. I wanted to protest this unnecessary cruelty. Alas, there is no arguing with bureaucrats, traffic cops or boundary gods. Struggling would just make the pain last longer. Slumped in defeat, I pulled out my wallet. I produced the junior driver's license Zeus had provided me with when I fell to earth. Name, Lester Papadopoulos. Age, 16. State, New York. Photo, 100% eye acid. Hand it over, Terminus demanded. You don't... I caught myself before I could say, have hands. Terminus was stubbornly delusional about his phantom appendages. I held up the driver's license for him to see. Frank leaned in, curious, and then caught me glaring and backed away. Very well, Lester, Terminus crowed. It's unusual to have a mortal visitor in our city, an extremely mortal visitor, but I suppose we can allow it. Here to shop for a new toga, or perhaps some skinny jeans? I swallowed back my bitterness. Is there anyone more vindictive than a minor god who finally gets to lord it over a major god? May we pass? I asked. Any weapons to declare? In better times I would have answered, only my killer personality. Alas, I was beyond even finding that ironic. The question did make me wonder what had happened to my ukulele, bow and quiver, however. Perhaps they were tucked under my bed. If the Romans had somehow lost my quiver, along with the talking prophetic arrow of Dodona, I would have to buy them a thank-you gift. No weapons, I muttered. Very well, Terminus decided. You may pass. And happy impending birthday, Lester. What? Move along. Next. There was no one behind us, but Terminus shooed us into the city, yelling at the non-existent crowd of visitors to stop pushing and form a single line. Is your birthday coming up? Frank asked as we continued. Congratulations. It shouldn't be. I stared at my license. April 8th, it says here. That can't be right. I was born on the 7th day of the 7th month. Of course, the months were different back then. Let's see. The month of Gamalion. But that was in the winter time. How do gods celebrate anyway? Frank mused. Are you 17 now, or 4017? Do you eat cake? He sounded hopeful about that last part, as if imagining a monstrous gold-frosted confection with 17 Roman candles on the top. I tried to calculate my correct day of birth. The effort made my head pound. Even when I'd had a godly memory, I hated keeping track of dates. The old lunar calendar, the Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, leap years, daylight saving time. Ugh! Couldn't we just call every day Apollo Day and be done with it? Yet Zeus had definitely assigned me a new birth date, 8th of April. Why? 7 was my sacred number. The date 8-4 had no sevens. The sum wasn't even divisible by 7. Why would Zeus make my birthday as 4 days from now? I stopped in my tracks, as if my own legs had turned into a marble pedestal. In my dream, Caligula had insisted that his Pandae finished their work by the time the blood moon rose. In 5 days. If what I observed had happened last night, that meant there were only 4 days left from today, which would make Doomsday the 8th of April, Leicester's birthday. What is it? Frank asked. Why is your face grey? I think my father left me a warning, I said, or perhaps a threat, and Terminus just pointed it out to me. How can your birthday be a threat? I'm mortal now. Perhaps, birthdays are always a threat. I fought down a wave of anxiety. I wanted to turn and run, but there was nowhere to go, only forward into New Rome, to gather more unwelcome information about my impending doom. Lead on, Frank Zhang, I said half-heartedly, slipping my license back in my wallet. Perhaps Tyson and Ella will have some answers. New Rome, the likeliest city on earth to find Olympian gods lurking in disguise, followed closely by New York, then Cozumel during spring break. Don't judge us. When I was a god, I would often hover invisibly over the red-tiled rooftops or walk the streets in mortal form, enjoying the sights, sounds and smells of our imperial heyday. It was not the same as ancient Rome, of course. They'd made quite a few improvements. No slavery, for one thing. Better personal hygiene, for another. Gone was the Suburra, the jam-packed slum quarter with its fire-trap apartments. Nor was New Rome a sad theme park imitation, like a mock Eiffel Tower in the middle of Las Vegas. It was a living city where modern and ancient mixed freely. Walking through the Forum, I heard conversations in a dozen languages, Latin among them. A band of musicians held a jam session with lyres, guitars and a washboard. Children played in the fountains, while adults sat nearby under trellises, shaded with vines. Lairs drifted here and there, becoming more visible in the long afternoon shadows. All manner of people mingled and chatted. One-headed, two-headed, even dog-headed cynocephali, who grinned and panted and barked to make their points. This was a smaller, kinder, much improved Rome. The Rome we always thought mortals were capable of but never achieved. And yes, of course, we gods came here for nostalgia, to relive those wonderful centuries when mortals worshipped us freely across the empire, perfuming the air with burnt sacrifices. That may sound pathetic to you, like an oldies concert cruise pandering to over-the-hill fans of washed-up bands. But what can I say? Nostalgia is one ailment immortality can't cure. As we approached the Senate House, I began to see vestiges of the recent battle. Cracks in the dome glistened with silver adhesive. The walls of some buildings had been hastily replastered. As with the camp, the city streets seemed less crowded than I remembered, and every so often, when a cynocephalus barked or a blacksmith's hammer clanged against a piece of armour, the people nearby flinched at the noise, as if wondering whether they should seek shelter. This was a traumatised city, trying very hard to get back to normal, and based on what I'd seen in my dreams, New Rome was about to be re-traumatised in just a few days. How many people did you lose? I asked Frank. I was afraid to hear numbers, but I felt compelled to ask. Frank glanced around us, checking if anyone else was within earshot. We were heading up one of New Rome's many winding cobblestone streets into the residential neighbourhoods. Hard to say, he told me. From the Legion itself, at least 25. That's how many are missing from the roster. Our maximum strength was 250. Not that we actually have that many in camp at any given time, but still, the battle literally decimated us. It felt as if a Lar had passed through me. Decimation, the ancient punishment for bad legions, was a grim business. Every 10th soldier was killed, whether they were guilty or innocent. I'm so sorry, Frank. I didn't know how to finish that sentence. I should have what? I was no longer a god. I could no longer snap my fingers and cause zombies to explode from 1,000 miles away. I had never adequately appreciated such simple pleasures. Frank pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders. It was hardest on the civilians. A lot of retired legionnaires from New Rome came out to help. They've always acted as our reserves. Anyway, that line of prophecy you mentioned, bodies fill the Tiber beyond count. That didn't mean there were many bodies after the battle. It meant we couldn't count our dead because they disappeared. My gut wound began to seethe. Disappeared how? Some were dragged away. When the undead retreated, we tried to get them all, but, he turned up his palms. A few got swallowed by the ground. Even Hazel couldn't explain it. Most went underwater during the fight in the little Tiber. The Naiads tried to search and recover them for us. No luck. He didn't vocalize the truly horrible thing about this news, but I imagined he was thinking it. Their dead had not simply disappeared. They would be back, as enemies. Frank kept his gaze on the cobblestones. I try not to dwell on it. I'm supposed to lead, stay confident, you know, but like today when we saw Terminus, there's usually a little girl, Julia, who helps him out. She's about 7. Adorable kid. She wasn't there today. No, Frank agreed. She's with a foster family. Her father and mother died in the fight. It was too much. I put my hand against the nearest wall. Another innocent little girl made to suffer, like Meg McCaffrey when Nero killed her father, like Georgina when she was taken from her mother's in Indianapolis. These 3 monstrous Roman emperors had shattered so many lives. I had to put a stop to it. Frank took my arm gently, one foot in front of the other. That's the only way to do it. I had come here to support the Romans. Instead, this Roman was supporting me. We made our way past cafes and storefronts. I tried to focus on anything positive. The vines were in bud. The fountains still had running water. The buildings in this neighbourhood were all intact. At least the city didn't burn, I ventured. Frank frowned like he didn't see the cause for optimism. What do you mean? The other line of prophecy. The words that memory wrought are set to fire. That refers to Ella and Tyson's work on the Sibylline books, doesn't it? The books must be safe, since you prevented the city from burning. Oh, Frank made a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh. Yeah, funny thing about that. He stopped in front of a quaint-looking bookshop. Painted on the green awning was the simple word libri. Racks of used hardbacks were set out on the sidewalk for browsing. Inside the window, a large orange cat sunned itself atop a stack of dictionaries. Prophecy lines don't always mean what you think they do. Frank rapped on the door. 3 sharp taps, 2 slow ones, and then 2 fast ones. Immediately the door flew inward. Standing in the entrance was a bare-chested, grinning Cyclops. "Come in," said Tyson. "I'm getting a tattoo."